So we are continuing with our study of the Amidah, the standing prayer, which is also, as we're going to see, referred to as the Shemona Esrei, the 18. And the main name that the rabbis use in all of our sources is tefillah, which nowadays we kind of think of as the generic word for prayer. And in fact, it is even used that way to mean just prayer in general. But when the rabbis talk about it specifically, they're referring to, to this formal Amidah that's, structured in a very particular way. Following the theme. Okay. All right. So now, as we look at our sources, we're looking at the rabbis' discussions about the tefillah. We've got to consider what they've got in front of them. What are they thinking about when they say these things? And along similar lines, we're going to have to think about when the various texts that we're going to look at, when they're from, because as we're going to see, I think in the centuries, let's say ranging from the mid Second Temple era through the period of the Talmud, there's a lot of change and a lot of variation in terms of what the fixed form of the prayers is looking like. What is that fixed form of the prayers? Who are the rabbis speaking to? Are they talking just to themselves and their small community? Do they have intentions that what they're setting up is going to be followed by what they refer to somewhat, patronizingly as the Am Haaretz, the people of the land, or the uneducated people, perhaps illiterate people. So let's keep all of those details in mind. Okay, so we're gonna look at the first bracha, the first blessing of the Amidah, and I need to grab my Siddurim as well.
But it says it on my little cards.
So if you are using the Siddur Sim Shalom for weekdays, it's going to be on page 36.
All right, thanks for calling me back.
And if you're looking at the Siddur Sim Shalom for Shabbat and festivals, you're looking at page 115. And for now, let's look at the A page, not the B page, the A page. The B page is the one that includes the matriarchs. We're not going to talk about that today. We'll talk about that perhaps next week. Well, as we talk about the Amidah as a whole, we have to be looking at this first paragraph, this first blessing that appears in our Siddurim, and hopefully that will become obvious shortly. So this is what it says. I'll just to familiarize ourselves, I'm going to chant it briefly using the Shabbat and festival melody. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avoteinu Elokei Avraham Elokei Yitzchak v'Elokei Yaakov, etc. Right? So that's, if you've ever been to shul on Shabbat, that might sound familiar. So it begins. I'll read this in English, and let's just pay attention to the themes that come up. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, and God of our fathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. God, the great, the mighty, and the awesome, God most high, who bestows good kindnesses and is master of all, and remembers the kindnesses of the ancestors, and brings a redeemer to the children of their children for the sake of his name in love. King who helps and saves and shields, blessed are you, Adonai, shield of Abraham. This is my translation. I tried to provide a very literal translation. So what are the themes?
I'm seeing a tension between this very intimate and Jewish God of our ancestors and our children, and then this universal theme in the middle of high and awesome and kindness and master of all.
Okay. So we're describing but I would maybe to put long words on that. We have transcendence and immanence both being portrayed in these words, right? Transcendence meaning kind of a God that is so big and great that we can't understand or relate to in any way. Immanence being this is the God of Abraham. God had a personal relationship with these people. Other themes?
Redemption. Go ahead. I just see that it's a list of people, and it's the God of each of those people, not only Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but also our fathers and ourselves.
Okay. Right, and so just notice the words that are used. We start with the basic blessing formula. Blessed are you, Adonai, and that's Yud He Vav He, God's personal name. And then for the rest of it, we use Elohe, right? Which is a more generic name of God. And so we're saying that maybe God had a direct personal relationship with each of these patriarchs and with us. And it was the same God that was doing all of those things, right? It was Yud He Vav He, the same, yeah. And so perhaps we see in here a statement of monotheism as well.
I like the part about remembering the kindnesses of the ancestors. So it's a God who
Reaffirmation.
thinks, who affirms and who is looking at the positive.
Yeah, and if you look here, we're using the word chasadim. I translated that as kindnesses. It's a technical term. We've talked about it before. It's a common word. It refers specifically to loving acts that are covenantal acts, right? Loving covenantal acts, typically from the more powerful bestowing upon the less powerful. So gemilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness, are things that we perform on behalf of somebody else. Usually it's someone who needs assistance, and then we come in and provide that assistance because we have the ability to do so. But notice that we're using chasadim to refer both to God's actions as well as to the ancestors' actions, right? So we have gomel chasadim tovim, that's referring to God. God bestows these good kindnesses. And then we talk about chasdei avot, the kindnesses performed by our ancestors. So maybe there's an aspect here of walking in God's ways or something along those lines. There's a term in Judaism called zchut avot, which is the merit of our ancestors. The idea being that maybe we're not so perfect, but our ancestors did a lot of great things, and therefore, for their sake, be nice to us, right? So we are invoking that to some degree here.
So, Rabbi, are they referring to? Again, I'm guessing so. They're referring to the fact that our ancestors, in accordance with the covenant with God, did kind acts to other people, or because they had a covenantal relationship with that other person, they did kind acts to them.
It seems to be that they were the kind of people who did kind things for others.
Okay, thank you.
Right, and that's something that is an expectation of God. And Cindy, you brought up another good and important theme here, which is covenant. Although it doesn't use the word brit directly, when we're talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we've got to be thinking about the covenant that God made with Abraham initially, and then that covenant was passed down to Isaac, and then it was passed down to Jacob, and then eventually led to God making a covenant with the Jewish people. And that covenant is a promise of protection and of land and of offspring. And then tied into that is that those who bless you shall be blessed; those who curse you shall be cursed. So by listing this trio, we seem to be evoking the covenant as well.
My question is, it seems that our religion, I don't know all religions, but we seem to, a good big part of it is to keep it going, keep the stories going, keep the ancestors. I mean, it's really important for us to keep it going, apparently.
Yeah, so there's perhaps a historical emphasis here, right? That we're not, as we're standing up to pray, we're not just doing it for the first time. Is that we look all the way back to the founders of our religion,
I hear that, but why is that so important to us? To keep
Why
the
is it so
culture?
important to us?
We
Well,
assume it's not true.
well, I mean, this idea of zchut avot is an important Jewish idea, right? The merit of our ancestors. So, you know, we're asking, what are we asking at the end of it is for God to bring a redeemer. So we've got this kind of looking forward into the future element of it. And we're saying that because of what our ancestors did, you know, a long, long time ago, you should help us in the present by, you know, bringing in a messianic age in the future.
But
I think, Joan, I guess I would flip your question around and say that Judaism has always focused on that. And that's why we see this reflected in the prayer.
But we also have this commandment to keep repeating stories and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I think those are similar things. We learn the lessons of our past, and our own identity, the way we see ourselves and our place in the world, is very much based on this kind of awareness of these ancient narratives. Right?
But have we learned our lessons from the past, or is history repeating itself?
Well, that's the question, right? Right. Hopefully there's forward momentum, right? And I think Judaism has that idea inherently. Right? We certainly know about the importance of memory in our culture and in our religion. We utilize, and we've seen this, we utilize the stories of the past as a way to somehow speak to the present, right? So the story of the Exodus, which we recite every day, is something that we're supposed to internalize, and it's supposed to be our story here in the present. We think about times in the past when God saved our people, with the Exodus being the paradigmatic saving event, but we compare that as a model for other moments. But at the same time, we look to the future for you know, some sort of messianic age, right? So this idea that let's say that cycle of that perhaps repeats itself historically will eventually come to an end. There's going to be an end of history, so to speak, right? You know, maybe for some that is a real thing that they look forward to, and maybe for others it's a bit more metaphorical. I can say that traditionally it certainly was a real thing, right? A looking for a Mashiach to be sent to alter the nature of reality in a fundamental way. All right.
Rabbi,
Yes.
when I was reading this, my brain took me to, as it was important what our ancestors did, it's just as important what we do, because we're somebody's ancestors. So it's all very lovely that our ancestors were pious and keeping the covenant and doing acts of kindness, but as I said, we're also somebody's ancestors, so we have to keep that up.
So let's hope that future generations look to us and call upon our actions for zchut avot. That's a nice way to look at it, and hopefully that inspires us in the present.
There's another answer to why should we care about our past and our history, and that is that there are people in the world who don't have that. If you think about the Native American or indigenous populations, if you think about the African Americans whose ancestors were ripped from all their tribes and interbred, and they don't know exactly where they came from, and they don't have their culture and their history intact, it is very important to have that, and we're lucky that we have that, despite all the people who have tried to do away with us.
Yeah, it's a sense of rootedness, and rootedness, I think, so often is tied to the place that you're living. And I think just because of the particularities of Jewish diaspora life, we've made that rootedness portable. But I don't think that's very common. I think when we look at human history, when peoples were, you know, sent into exile, most often they essentially assimilated and lost that particular, you know, cultural identity.
It's interesting how strong that need to know where you came from is. I think of friends of mine who are adopted and how they have pushed so hard to figure out who their biological parents were and where they came from. And I always wondered, well, you have this great life now. You had a great life since you started. Why that need? And I think it's just a biological need to know where you came from.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So that's the Amidah as we have it in our prayer books. You look at any, unless we're talking about a very, modern contemporary prayer book that has altered the formula, we could say that, and since the days of 1500, past 1500 years, this is the formula for the opening prayer of the Amidah. So let's look at the Mishnah. We've looked at a number of Mishnayot from Tractate Brachot, where all of the laws about saying the Shema and then the Tefillah are introduced by the rabbis. So here we have Rabban Gamliel Omer. B'chol yom mipalel adam shmone esrei. So Rabban Gamliel says, every day a person should pray the 18, or should pray 18. All right? Shmone esrei. That's where the term comes from. The 18 blessings. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer, me'ein shmone esrei. So Rabbi Yehoshua says, this is an abstract of the 18. So when the rabbis talk about me'ein, which they're talking about something in place of the 18. So I'll give you an example of that. Birkat Hamazon is traditionally 3 blessings. A 4th blessing was added on to it. Right? So we've got this series of blessings that cover 3 different major themes that the rabbis identified. And so that's the 3 blessing prayer. So they also talk about a prayer called Me'ein Shalosh, Bracha Me'ein Shalosh. What is the Bracha Me'ein Shalosh? So we refer to it as Al HaMichya, or Bracha Achrona. So for Birkat Hamazon, we say that when we have a meal, and a meal is defined by something with bread. Well, what if we eat something that's not bread involved? And it's one of the, let's say, important foods identified in the Torah. So then we say a bracha, that's bracha achat me'ein shalosh. The one blessing that's an abstract of the 3 blessing, right? So the prayer Al HaMichya is kind of like, I'd say it's even like a summary of Birkat Hamazon. It captures all of the themes in Birkat Hamazon. It just does it much shorter in a single blessing. So that's what Rabbi Yehoshua is saying, right? There's you can say the Shmona Esrei kind of consolidated into a single blessing that covers all the themes. Okay. So it seems that he has accepted what Rabban Gamliel is saying, right? So this idea of having these 18 blessings, no question that we need to do that. It's just that there might be a short way to do that. And then we get Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva Omer, im shgurat filato befiv yitpalel shmona esrei. Ve'im lav me'ein shmona esrei. So Rabbi Akiva comes in and he tries to maybe deal with any potential contradiction between these 2 statements. And he says, if his tefillah is fluent in his mouth, then he should pray 18 blessings. And if not, he should pray the abstract of the 18 blessings. All right. So what is Rabbi Akiva doing here? What's if you think about in Rabbi Akiva's day, so we're talking the beginning, first decades of the 2nd century CE. Right? Temple's been destroyed for a good, 30, 40 years. And so what's the situation Rabbi Akiva is speaking to?
Is he talking about the Achrona, or is he talking about the shortened version of the Birkat Hamazon with a short form that we have?
He's not talking about Birkat Hamazon. We're talking about the Amidah.
Oh, okay. Because
All
how
right?
come it
The
said
18
Birkat
blessing
Hamazon
weekday
earlier?
Amidah.
Okay.
Dealing with the fact that there may be issues of literacy and education.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is not written down. So anybody who can do all 18 blessings has them memorized and has them memorized in order. So it seems that Rabbi Akiva is speaking to some people, we don't know who they are, but some people who don't have it memorized, right? Maybe these are the young students who haven't had a chance to memorize it yet. Maybe he's trying to speak beyond the community of the rabbis. It's hard to know, right? These are really early sources. Now, Rabban Gamliel, there are a couple of Rabban Gamliels. This is Rabban Gamliel II. As the note says, he was a direct descendant of Hillel HaZaken, Hillel the Elder, who is really the originator of the rabbinic system. So he's got yichus, right? He has an illustrious lineage. He is the leader of the community of rabbis in Yavne in the decades after the destruction of the temple, right? So it's Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai who was able to get out and kind of bring some of his students out to Yavne, but then it's Rabban Gamliel II who becomes the Nasi, which is really the leader of the reformed Sanhedrin. That it moved around over the subsequent decades, but initially there was about a 10-year period where it's in Yavne, and Rabban Gamliel institutes an effort to start collecting all of the teachings that they can remember. And so what we have here is a statement where Rabban Gamliel is issuing the rule, right? Where he seems to be saying that there's an obligation to pray the 18 blessings. Right? Now, Rabban Gamliel II was something of an autocrat. He ruled with an iron fist. Perhaps the times demanded it because we were in a time of crisis and extreme transition, and maybe it needed someone to come down, rule very strongly in order to create some sort of unity and some sort of vision for going forward. The rabbis did not appreciate it, however, and there is a famous story, which we're not going to study here, where Rabban Gamliel is deposed.
Right.
He was so harsh in his rule that the rabbis rose up against him. They deposed him and they put somebody else in his place. Right. So, but much of what we have today is a credit to Rabban Gamliel's strong vision. All right. Now, this is from the Babylonian Talmud. Now, so if that earlier text is reflecting an innovation in, let's say, the decade after the destruction of the Second Temple, here we have the Babylonian Talmud. In Babylonia, far away, the Talmud, so it's centuries later, potentially, and it's not fully edited and put together until, around the 5th or 6th century. So keep that in mind. So this passage is in Tractate Megillah, not in Brachot. Megillah deals not just with Megillat Esther, but with all sorts of scrolls, rules about Torahs, and it gets into some rules around prayer as well. Tfilah minalan, it begins. So tfilah, and here we're talking about the Amidah. Minalan, from where do we derive it? All right. Okay, it's accepted that we have an obligation to say the tfilah, but where does it come from? Where does that obligation originate? Ditanya. So Ditanya introduces a Braita, and a Braita, as we've seen Braitas before, a Braita is from the same era as the Mishnah, so 2nd century of the Common Era, but not in the Mishnah. So which means that as the Babylonian Talmud is presenting it, this is a source that is from roughly the same time period as the Mishnah that we just saw. But the problem is, it's recorded in a text that developed later. So here's what the Braita says. Shimon HaPakuli hisdir shmona esrei brachot lifnei Rabban Gamliel al haseder beyavne. So Shimon HaPakuli. A pakuli is something like a flax maker or something, or he worked in flax. So this guy, Shimon the Pakuli worker, ordered hisdir, like Siddur or Seder, ordered the 18 blessings before Rabban Gamliel al HaSeder according to their fixed order beyavne, at Yavne. So now we have, Rabban Gamliel just gave us the rule. Here we have a Braita that's actually telling us the story, right? This guy Shimon HaPakuli, he arranged the order in front of Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabbi Yochanan, the Amrei la b'matnita. So Rabbi Yochanan said, and some say that it was taught in a Braita. Mea ve'esrim zkenim uvahem kama nevi'im tiknu shmona esrei brachot al seder. So we have this Rabbi Yochanan Or maybe it was in a Braita. We're not exactly, there's different versions of this, as the Babylonian Talmud is describing it. They taught that the 120 elders, among them being some prophets, tiknu. So they really, they decreed, right? They fixed, like the word a tikkun olam, same word, tiknu. And a tikkun is when we're establishing some sort of requirement that's not from the Torah. So the rabbis are legislating in their own authority. And usually as it's presented, it's in order to deal with some sort of emergency type of situation. So, but we have these 120 elders, among them being some prophets, issued this takana, this edict of the 18 blessings according to their order. All right, so 120 elders, what does that sound like?
Sanhedrin.
All right, maybe the Sanhedrin is 70.
70.
And that's right.
This is like the Anshe Knesset Haggadolah, right?
Mhm.
The men of the Great Assembly, which is this legendary group of elders that, you know, are dated in rabbinic sources to sometime around Ezra and Nehemiah, so like 5th century BCE, that issued also, you know, established all sorts of rules and things like that. Now, the problem is we've got no historical evidence that they ever existed. So it may be, I mean, the rabbis talk about it as being their kind of their ancestors, their kind of intellectual ancestors, and that gives them some authority. The problem is that from a historical perspective, we know very, very little about what was going on in the first half of the Second Temple era, right? So anything up until about 150, we really don't know much. And so here we're seeing from Babylonia a legend about these 120 elders, among whom were some prophets, and there were prophets in those early that early period after the return from the Babylonian exile. They're the ones who came up with the 18 blessings. All right. Now, so if you're the rabbis now let's say in Babylonia, right, in let's say the 3rd century of the Common Era, you're looking back to an event of 800 years ago. Right, and you're saying that this august body of elders who you know, were leading the Jewish people in the land of Israel at the beginning of the Second Temple era, they established the Amidah that we all know and love all the way back then, 800 years ago. So that gives it a very strong sense of authority. All right, what's the problem?
It's a legend.
Well, it's a legend, but even from within the Talmud's perspective.
Does it not go back to Sinai?
Oh, definitely not. Not here. It goes
But
back
it's
to
not-
well, let's be clear here. The 18 blessings in order, following these particular themes, were established by the 120 elders. That's what we're saying. Now, maybe there's some sort of authoritative, you know, reason going back even earlier that they're utilizing, but you know, this statement is talking about the exact 18 blessings that we are familiar with.
Don't they have to tie it back to Sinai somehow?
Well, that's
To give it
the
that
concept
authority?
of a tikkun, is that it's not tied back to Sinai. Right, a tikkun or a takana is something that is, you know, the rabbis, in the interests of something that is very important to them in their day, they issue a decree that's not required by the Torah.
Right.
Okay.
So what is the meaning of the order? What's at the core of that?
So the word seder
Yeah.
means order. And so we saw earlier Rabban Gamliel saying that we need to pray 18 blessings a day.
Right.
Okay, so that's an order, right? There's 18 blessings covering particular themes, and they have to be recited in a particular order. And then we saw in this legend, or not legend, we saw Braita, where this guy Shimon HaPakuli is the one who says hisdir. he ordered them in front of Rabban Gamliel.
Mhm.
So he's giving us the order in, let's say, the 70s CE in Yavne to Rabban Gamliel. And then if we're going to kind of create an order of events here, Rabban Gamliel then based on the work of Shimon HaPakuli says there's an obligation to recite these 18 blessings in this order. All right. But now what this Gemara is doing here is saying that in fact these 18 blessings were ordered not by Shimon HaPakuli, but in fact by the 120 elders and prophets.
So is it true that basically it's not the Oraita?
Oh, it's definitely not Doraita, right?
Right.
From the Torah.
Right.
So maybe let's see. Let's go on in the Talmud. Tanu Rabbanan, right? So we have a Braita now. Minayin shomrim avot. From where is it that we say avot, right? So avot, as we saw, is the first blessing of the Amidah, right? This is when we invoke Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all of that. So what this Braita is asking, is there any sort of a biblical source for saying this blessing? So the answer is yes. Shana Amar, and now we're going to quote Psalm 29, verse 1, which is probably familiar. Havu Ladonai b'nei Elim. Havu Ladonai b'nei Elim, etc. Right? So Havu Ladonai b'nei Elim, ascribe to the Lord mighty Elim. Elim actually means gods or divine beings. But here we're saying mighty ones, right? We're saying mighty ones, you mighty ones. So who are the mighty ones?
Are those minions / angels / hosts?
I would say in the Pshat, yes, but the way that this Braita is interpreting it, the mighty ones are in fact Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the patriarchs. They're these great figures, right? So when it says Havu Adonai b'nei Elim, that's our inspiration, right? For having Avot be the opening blessing of the Amidah. Minayin shomrim gvurot. From where is it that we say gvurot? Gvurot, that's the second blessing of the Amidah. It's on the bottom half of the page that we're on. This is about mighty acts. All right. And so what do we do now? We Shana Emar, we cite the second half of that verse. Havu Adonai kavod va'oz. Right? Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Right? So we're talking about strength. So gvurot, mighty acts. So that's a good proof text. Uminayin shomrim kedushot. Where is it that we say kedushot? That's the third blessing, right? Where we're proclaiming God's holiness, right? So let's look at the next verse. Havu Ladonai kavod shemo hishtachavu Ladonai ba'adrat kodesh. Give to the Lord the glory due to His name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of His holiness, right? So there you can see the two verses side by side. So we've got the second verse is talking about praising God and focusing on God's majesty and holiness, which is of course the theme of the Kedusha. So what has this Braita done is it's gone through, it's looked at these first two verses of Psalm 29 and found in them the themes of the first three blessings of the Amidah in order. And that's maybe tied into this teaching that we just had about the 18 blessings being, established and ordered, back in ancient times. Now, they don't. This Braita doesn't explicitly say that it was these 120 elders that did it based upon these verses. So, someone has put these texts next to each other in order to create a narrative. This Braita continues, by the way, with all 18 blessings of the Amidah and provides some sort of text from the Bible for every single one of them. And they're not all from Psalm 29, right? So the first three are Psalm 29 and the rest, they just pick other verses on all the various themes. And in a lot of cases, try and create some sort of thematic connection of why one, is followed by another. So it kind of goes on and on. We're not going to look at all that right now. But then it comes back to the question. Right? All right. Going back to our original Braita, right, where we've got 120 elders, among whom there were some prophets. decreed the tefillah in order, what was Shimon Hapakuli doing? Right? It says that we started saying that Shimon Hapakuli is the one who put them in order, but then we had this teaching that said the 120 elders put them in order. That's a good question, right? Chum v'chazar v'sidrum, right? So what? They forgot them, and then he went back and reordered them, right? So in other words, somehow the sages established this. It was lost from Israel, and somehow Shimon Hapakuli remembers them, or is the bearer of some sort of ancient wisdom that had remained hidden, or maybe was received divine inspiration or something. Somehow he gets this knowledge and he presents it to Rabban Gamliel, who immediately recognizes for what it's worth and then establishes that this is the halacha. All right. So this is the story that's told in the Babylonian Talmud. Similar stories, similar legends about the Amidah, the 18 blessings of the Amidah being established by these 120 elders appear in the Palestinian Talmud, so the Talmud of the land of Israel, and in Midrashim. So it seems to have been a widespread legend about it, but there also seems to be some sort of awareness that, let's say, before Rabban Gamliel, maybe these 18 prayers don't exist. Maybe they don't exist in the way that the rabbis then present them. Or maybe they exist but are only being utilized by a small group of people. It's hard to know. In that original Mishnah that we looked at, we have Rabban Gamliel saying 18, and Rabbi Yoshua saying, the abstract of 18, right? So there is an idea that some people are saying 18, some people are not saying 18. Maybe they're trying to make it easy for the people who are less likely to be able to say the 18, or they're trying to spread this practice out. It's really hard to know.
Now, but isn't there stories about how the different services? Sorry, I'm going to cough now. How the morning service, the afternoon service, and the evening service, which all have the Amidah in it, are tied to the specifically to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
All right, let's go on. Good questions, Lindy. The Mechilta of Rabbi Yishmael. So this is when we talk about the ancient classic midrash collections, there's two major categories. There's Midrash Agadah, the midrash of stories, of the narrative. So on Thursday in our Midrash Rabbah class, that's Midrash Agadah. And then there's Midrash Halacha, so the midrash that focuses more on halachic issues. So this is Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael, which is a Midrash Halacha on the book of Exodus in Sefer Shemot. So, and it's early, right? So, from the land of Israel, early centuries of the Common Era. Uminayin shomrim Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu Elokei Avraham Elokei Yitzchak Elokei Yaakov. So where is it that we say, and then they're quoting the first paragraph of the Amidah, the Avot prayer, right? God of, blessed are you, Adonai our God, God of our fathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. Where is it from? How do we know? What's the source? Shene Emar, as it says, Vayomer od Elohim el Moshe ko tomar el bnei Israel v'chulei, right? So now we're citing Exodus. That is a misquote. Anyway, all right. The 3:15 is correct. I'm looking at the Hebrew citation is incorrect. All right. Exodus 3:15. God said further to Moses, thus shall you say to the children of Israel, Adonai, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob sent me to you. All right. So the question we're dealing with is, why are the patriarchs included in the opening blessing of the Amidah? Right? I mean, we saw the language of it, and it's invoking the Zechut Avot, the merit of our ancestors, but why? Like, why is it so important? We're starting this prayer, which is so important for the rabbis, and we start by invoking Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so we see that the words themselves, right? we start with Elohei, Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu, right? Our God, God of our avot, of our ancestors. And really, I mean, just to be very precise here, fathers, right? There's no question that we're talking about fathers and not fathers and mothers, right? This is not egalitarian. It did not occur to the rabbis to be including the matriarchs at this point. So the language appears in Exodus, the exact same language that's used in the Amidah. It's not a common expression, and it's not used in the context of prayers, but the expression is there. So let's see what it says in its a little bit larger context. So this starts in Exodus chapter 3, verse 6. And this is when Moses is encountering God at the burning bush. And at the very beginning, he encounters the bush, and Moses says, "Who are you?" And God says, "Take off your shoes," and it's holy ground. And then God says the following, "Vayomer Anochi." Then he said, "I am Elohei Avicha," right? That's the God of your fathers. He's speaking directly, God is speaking directly to Moses in this moment. Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. Vayaster Moshe panav ki yareh me'abit el Elohim. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So this is God's first self-revelation to Moses. And then a little bit later, Moses asks God, "Well, what am I supposed to tell the Israelites about who you are?" Okay, so then God says, and this is verses 15 to 16. Verse 15 is the verse that the Mechilta, that Midrash we just looked at, is quoting. God said further to Moses, "Thus shall you speak to the Israelites. The Lord," we have Adonai, "the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This shall be my name forever, this my appellation for all eternity. Go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob," and there it's just Elohei Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, right? "Has appeared to me and said, I have taken note of you and of what is being done to you in Egypt." Right? So Moses is asking, "Who are you?" God says, "I am Yud He Vav He," and the legends already, about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, people know those legends. They know who they were. They know about the covenant. They know that God had a relationship with each of them. And here God is identifying to Moses that this is the same God that was the God of their ancestors. And this is the God that's going to lead them out of slavery. Right? So what is the Mechilta doing is it's connecting. I mean, and I think it's accurate, right? They got the whoever composed that bracha used this passage as their source text. So they wanted to be able to identify which God we're talking about. And just as Moses was doing that as a way to establish, what he was there to do to the Israelites, we're doing it as well to establish that we're in that same line of tradition. All right, let's go back to the Mishnah. This is the next Mishnah from what we saw earlier. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer says, "Ha'oset tfilato keva, ein tfilato tachanunim." Rabbi Eliezer says, when a person makes his tfilah, keva means fixed, right? Following a particular formula. Ein tfilato tachanunim. His tfilah is not supplication. Tachanun is like the pouring out of your soul, right? We can say maybe the more extemporaneous outpouring of prayer. So he's acknowledging that if your prayer becomes too rote, then it doesn't have this quality of tachanunim. Now, he doesn't say it's not valid and you haven't fulfilled your obligation, but we do seem to be establishing an objective that prayer does have this quality of tachanunim to it, and recognizing that it has a seder, it has an order to it. And so we want to try and somehow get beyond keva and get into tachanunim somehow. Or you might hear talk about keva and kavana, right? To be directing our hearts more in what we might use, in English, we might, our prayer should be more spiritual. We should mean it. We should feel something. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Hamahalech bimkom sakana mitpalel tefillah tzara. Rabbi Yoshua said, a person is walking in a place of danger, he should pray the tefillah tzara, the shortened tefillah. Now earlier, I think it was Yehoshua who said that there's the me'ain shmona esrei, there's the abstract of the shmona esrei. Here we're talking about a tefillah tzara, a shortened tefillah. Are those the same thing?
We don't know.
Not sure. Remember, Rabbi Akiva settled the difference by distinguishing between those who know it and those who don't know it. But here, it seems to be that the person has a choice, right? I'm in a dangerous situation, and therefore, even though I'm capable of reciting the full 18 prayer Amidah, I need to shorten it because I've got to watch out.
Right.
So maybe this is talking about something different. So what is this tefillah? Let's see. Omer Hosha Hashem et Amcha She'erit Yisrael b'chol parashat ha'ibur yiyu tzarchehem lefanecha baruch atah Hashem shomei tefillah. Now the Mishnah is giving us the shortened prayer. What does he say? Save, O Lord, your people, the remnant of Israel. In every time of crisis, may their needs be before you. Blessed are you, O Lord, who hears prayer. That seems to be our tefillah ketzara. So it seems like this is probably not the abstract of the 18, right? Shomea tefillah, by the way, is one of the brachot that's in the Amidah on weekdays. It's the last of the middle section of petitionary blessings.
I have a question. What is a fixed? What he meant by fixed tfilato keva? Is it fixed time or fixed content? It's not clear.
I'm not sure. I mean, that's a good question. Earlier, we saw the term kavanah having to do with the Shema, and that when a person is reciting the words, as long as they're aware that I have an obligation to recite the Shema during this time period, and by saying the words in this way, I'm fulfilling that obligation, that seems to be enough, right? That's the definition of kavanah in that context. Here we seem to be talking about something different, because tachanonim that's the pouring out of the soul. So keva would seem to be, well, they're not, just in terms of looking at the language, they're not opposites, but that when tefillah is keva, it can't be tachanonim.
Right. But it's hard to tell what is keva.
Sorry, Shlomo, you're not coming through.
Oh.
Not sure why. It looks.
I heard that he said that he would, and now I forgot what he said. I was going to say that when we read last week about
the rest of you hear me? Okay.
Dawn,
Yeah.
Can someone say something?
I can hear you, and I heard Shlomo too.
Maybe it's my problem. I'm not hearing you. I'm not sure why. Let me fix that.
I was pointing out that when the rabbis would get up at dawn every day to say the Amidah, there wasn't anything wrong with that. So I don't think keva means a fixed time.
I don't know. To me, fixed seems like the words are so fixed in your mind that you're not thinking about the meaning of them, which is the kavanah aspect.
I think of it as that the prayer has a theme, but you're not allowed to riff on it. You have to use the words that are given.
So Rabbi Eliezer is suggesting you've got to not do that. You need to innovate something.
Is it innovating the words or just having more thoughts around the words?
I don't know, because this idea of an interior dimension of prayer, I'm not sure it existed in this time. Right? So when talking about a sukkah, they use the word keva as well, right? So a keva is like a dirat keva and a dirat arai. Dirat keva means your permanent dwelling, and dirat arai means your temporary dwelling, right? So you've got to, do the things that you would normally do in your permanent dwelling out in your temporary dwelling. So tfilato keva sounds like it's like the fixed formula that we do all year long.
Right.
Right? But he doesn't say you have to have tachanunim. He just says that if you're so fixed on this, then it doesn't qualify as tachanunim. So maybe we need to. He's saying that there's opportunity to add your own personal supplication in the tefillah, right? So and you've got to add to the fixed formula in order to do that. Elsewhere, though, we'll see the Gemara talk about you're not allowed to mess with the order of the 18 blessings, right? They have to be these 18, and you can't have any other ones. Oh, by the way, that 19th one is okay. So, so is Rabbi Eliezer disagreeing with that idea, or maybe this somehow is not in conflict with that? The part of the service that immediately follows the Amidah is called Tachanun. Right, it's the falling on one's face, nifilat apayim, falling on one's face, and that is a time for personal supplication, and it immediately follows the Amidah. So maybe that's an attempt to try and make Rabbi Eliezer's teaching here part of the tradition in a more universal way. But if Tachanunim is supposed to be this, non-fixed form, the problem with it is that it's become very fixed, right? So in Siddur Rav Amram, right? So the first Siddur from the 9th century, Rav Amram puts down what he does for Tachanun, and then that basically becomes, Tachanun gets fixed because everybody just copies Rav Amram after that. So it seems to have missed the point a little bit. All right, let's go on to the next one. Haya rochev al chamor yered. He's riding on a donkey. He should get off, right? So the time to say the tefillah has arrived. Get off your donkey and say it, right? So if you're driving in your car, time has come. You pull over to the side of the road and start davening, right? Im eno yachol lered, right? If you would cause a traffic accident by doing so, you're not able to do it. It's not safe. Yachazir et panav. You should turn your face, all right? If he's not able to turn his face, he should yechaven, that's the same word as kavanah. He should direct his heart towards the house of the Holy of Holies. Right? So here we say the idea of kavanah, but here kavanah there's an idea of direction, like a physical direction, but also an intention, right? I'm thinking about, because I can't safely face, right? If I were to face Jerusalem, I would crash into the car in front of me. So I think about my heart being, sending those prayers towards the Holy of Holies. And we saw a similar kind of thing about saying the Shema if you're up in a tree, or if you're going through a place where there's robbers, right? So we're very concerned about saying these things at the right time. But they're recognizing that sometimes it's not always convenient, and so there's opportunities to have a shortened form of it somehow, to stay on your donkey while you're doing it. The next Mishnah says, you're sitting in a ship, on a wagon, or on a raft, right, where maybe you don't know which direction Jerusalem is, or you're not able to face it. Same thing. Direct your heart towards the house of Kodesh HaKodeshim, right? And of course, synagogues are traditionally oriented towards the land of Israel, and it's based on this idea that we're directing our prayers in that direction. All right. Next chapter 5 of Mishnah Brachot. Ein omdim lehitpalel ela mitoch koved rosh. A person should not stand up to pray the Amidah except from koved rosh. So here it says reverent state of mind. Koved rosh literally means a heavy mind, right? Can't be in a frivolous mood, right? It's got to be serious. Chasidim harishonim, right? These first pious ones, these early pious ones. We saw them earlier, right? Hayu shohim sha'achat umitpalim. They would wait. They would delay for a full hour and then pray. Kedei sheyichavnu et libam lamakom, so that they could be able to direct their hearts to God.
It was a kind of a warm-up, I guess.
Yeah, they're spending a full hour. Of course, that's not exactly 60 minutes as we think about it, but they're spending a significant amount of time preparing themselves in order to enter into this state of koved rosh, of having this heavy head, this seriousness. Afilu amelech shoel bishlomo lo yishivenu. Even if the king asks inquires as to his well-being, lo yishivenu, he shouldn't answer him. Afilu nachash karuch al akevo lo yafsik. And even if a snake is wrapped around his heel, he should not stop.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So this feels a little aspirational to me. It's in the Mishnah, and I always find it interesting that we start with a description of some sort of these pious people. Not exactly sure who they are, but we've got a memory of this pious action that they take. And then as it develops, the halakha develops, and it tries to institute these pious acts into everyday behaviors. And by doing that, maybe saying we're all pious people, or these. Of course, the result of that is we end up with stricter and stricter rules, right? What was once done only by kind of this particular group of people is now something that is expected of the masses. And because we're a social people and we pray in community, you can see why it's easy for these things to spread.
I mean, how do you think this compares to what we discussed before, that as soon as you wake up in the morning, you pray? And there's the prayers before you get out of bed, and the prayer when you go to the bathroom. And I mean, so prayer starts at the beginning of consciousness in the morning, which is so different from this notion of preparing yourself for kavanah. I mean, what personally do you prefer?
Well, I think I'm not sure that those are different, right? So the question is, what are these Hasidim Rishonim doing to prepare themselves? So maybe they're doing Psukei de Zimra, maybe something like that. Maybe that's the origin of Psukei de Zimra, right? We don't just jump into Shacharit, which is the thing what we're actually supposed to do. We start with a preparation for that as a way to get us into this state of koved rosh. Now we don't have time to do this on a regular basis, right? You can imagine somebody who is, a sage who can spend all their time, doesn't have to take kids to school and pack lunches and things like that. Might be able to do this. But the idea of saying blessings when we wake up, and that's a wonderful idea. It's about consciousness, and that doesn't take a long time.
Yeah.
Right. This seems to be more of a meditation, like a clearing of the mind.
Yeah.
That's what
it seems to me, aside from what you're talking about, the tasks that you have to do, if you're spending all day praying, you're not studying.
But
maybe they didn't have anything to, well, I was going to say to study because it wasn't written yet.
Yeah. So is it okay? That raises another interesting question. These guys are Hasidim, right? Pious people. Is it good to be a pious person? Right.
I know.
So there is a distinction. I don't know if it's intended in this Mishnah, but there is a distinction made between Hasidim and Chachamim. Right? A pious person or a wise person, right? So they don't necessarily go together. Right. So a pious person might be somebody who, they have ascetic practices. They do things like this, spend an hour before they even start praying. Maybe there's a mystical aspect to this, and a miracle working at, like a Hasidim are able to do miracles at times. A Chacham might not be able to do a miracle, a wise person, because a wise person spends his day studying and issuing rulings according to law, and maybe doesn't have time for such ascetic practices, right? So, And I mean, there are stories among the rabbis which contrast the Chassid from the Chacham. Yeah, but also look how the Mishnah we start with a statement from the Mishnah, which is, I'm not sure how halachic it is. It sounds more like advice, right? Ein omdim, one should not stand up to pray except with a reverent state of mind. Well, that might not always be possible. And what if you're, riding on a donkey in the middle of a robber-infested land, right? I'm not sure how much koved rosh you can have in that circumstance. Does that mean you shouldn't daven the Amidah? Probably, probably doesn't mean that. So it seems to be that we're stating a preference. And then we get into the Chasidim Rishonim and say, and there were these people who used to take it to the extreme, and this is what they would do, right? And then the statement at the end, you don't respond to the king. Well, we already saw it for the Shema, you do respond to the king. So is this saying that this is advice for everybody? Or maybe this is just the practice of the Chasidim Harishonim, who were so pious that maybe it's they wouldn't respond to the king, or they wouldn't react to the snake because they weren't even aware of it, right? They had entered into such a different spiritual state that they weren't even aware of their surroundings, right? They were transported.
Well, I hope the snake wasn't poisonous.
I hope so too.
But it says should, not.
Well,
I mean, that, so it cuts against that this is being descriptive and more that it's being proscriptive.
Doesn't say chayav, like obligated. Ein omdim, one does not stand to pray except from within koved rosh. I mean, that seems like a somewhat subjective term. Also, like,
What is koved rosh again?
heavy head.
It's kind of serious. I mean,
We're in COVID times.
We're COVID, yeah, exactly. Koved means heavy. The kaved is the liver, which is a very dense organ. And of course, it's the same letters as kavod, which is holy. All right. I think this is probably a good place for us to stop. Cindy, next time we will get to, I think, what you were referring to in terms of looking at other origins of the Amidah, right? So, because what have we seen so far? We saw that these 120 elders introduced it. We saw that maybe it's alluded to in Psalms. Maybe it's this Shimon HaPakuli, organizing it, and Rabban Gamliel codifying it. Or maybe Abraham and Isaac davened also, and Jacob, right? So we'll find out next week, and we'll look at the matriarchs as well.
All right. I'm coming.